Hey Code Crew, in this lesson we're going to continue our core data series and I'll show you how to create, retrieve, update, and delete data from core data. Now if you've missed the previous few lessons, I highly recommend that you go and check those out first. One more thing, before we begin, I want to mention that these core data lessons are actually part of the database course in my 𝗧𝗶𝗺𝗲 program. Inside 𝗧𝗶𝗺𝗲+, you'll be able to build this travel app that uses core data for the list of locations as well as personal notes for each location. Alright, now let's jump into Xcode. Alright, so in this Xcode project, I'm going to show you how to create, retrieve, update, and delete data from core data. Now, I did set up a lot of the UI for this project, and I'm only going to be focusing on the core data transactions bit. And the reason for that is because if I showed you how to build the UI, 90% of this lesson would have just been building UI, with 10% being the actual core data bits, which is the focus of this lesson. So that's why I built it out, but I'm going to walk you through the UI work that I've done so far, and I'm going to show you where the missing core data bits are that we're going to fill out together. Okay, so first of all, what data are we working with here? So back in lesson 2 and lesson 1, we were talking about a person entity. Same thing here, person entity. These attributes are the same, which I've defined. I've generated the, actually before that, I've set the code gen to manual and none. That means I have to manually generate the subclasses. And you can see that I have done that here. So here's my class, there's nothing in here, and these are the properties mapped to the attributes. Okay, so what does the UI look like? If I go to the main.storyboard, you'll see that I have a table view, which I'm going to use to display all of the people in our database. And then we have an add button up here, which I'm going to show an alert or a pop-up with a text box where we can type in a name, and that's going to add a new entry into our core data database. We're going to be able to swipe each row to delete that person from the database. And finally, we're going to be able to tap on a row and pop up that alert again and be able to edit the name and then save it. So that's updating data. Now I do want to mention that in this lesson, I'm not going to explain how table views work and how a lot of this UI is constructed, because we've gone through a lot of this stuff in previous lessons. If you haven't seen those, or you're still confused about table views and protocols and delegates and stuff like that, and how the table view gets data from the view controller, do visit my other lessons, especially the 29-day beginner challenge, which I'll link to. I'll put a card up on the screen. So let's dive into the view controller and let me show you some of the code. We're going to do retrieval first. I'm going to show you how the table view gets the data, and then we're going to hook that up to core data. So this items property right here, this is the array of data that is powering the table view. As you can see now, it's not set to anything, but that's where we come in, and we're going to hook it up to our core data data. So we're going to start at the top by getting a reference to the managed object context. Remember from the previous lessons, I explained that you don't work with the core data persistent store directly. There is a layer called the managed object context that you interact through to save and retrieve your data. So how do we get a reference to this managed object context? Well, inside the app delegate here, you see this property for a persistence container. So we're going to get a reference to this, which is going to give us the core data persistent container. And there's a property on this object, which gives us the managed object context. So up here, we're going to say UI application.shared.delegate, and we're going to cast that as an instance of the app delegate. And then we can access that property I just showed you called persistent container, and then a property off of that called the view context. This is the one we're looking for, the NS managed object context. So we're going to keep a reference to that, and we're going to call it context up there. And that's going to make it easy for us to basically use the context to retrieve and save. We're going to be using this reference a lot. Okay, so down here in the view did load, this is standard hooking up table view stuff. There is this method here called fetch people, and that's this method right here. As you can see, it doesn't do anything right now, but we're going to fetch the data from core data to display in the table view. All right, so the way we do this is context dot fetch. And you can see here that, first of all, it throws an error. If it cannot fetch what you're asking it to fetch, then it's going to raise an error. So we do have to wrap this in a do catch block and handle that error. But you'll notice that the other thing it accepts is a fetch request. Now, we're going to start by putting in a very simple fetch request to say, retrieve all of the people objects. But in the next lesson, we're going to take a look at other types of requests that you can do to sort and filter. All right, so let's choose one of these, and let's choose this one right here. I don't think it really matters right now. And I pointed this out to you in lesson 1 or 2, but you can see here that it's got a static or type method here called fetch request, and this actually returns a fetch request for all of the person entities in core data. So this is the method that we're going to call of the person class to generate a fetch request that we're going to pass into the managed view context. So let's take a look at how that works. So since it's a type method, I don't have to declare a new instance of person. I just go person.fetchRequest like that. All right, so I'm passing in a request to grab all of the person objects in core data, and we can either do the try keyword like that to not care if any errors get raised, or we can actually handle the error properly. So we're going to do a do catch block like this, and again, I'm not going to explain or cover this in depth right here since this lesson is sort of a little more advanced. So essentially we are trying to fetch this. So we are going to assign the results. It's going to be an array of person objects. We're going to assign it to this property up here. So self.items equals, and we're going to try. So after all of the items get fetched, then we assign it to this array. We got to tell the table view to refresh or reload its data. So that's what we're going to do here. Table view dot reload data. Now I'm going to do this in the main queue because sometimes we're going to be calling this fetch people method from a background thread. So the way we do that is we use dispatch queue.main.async, and this is going to because this is UI work. When you reload the table view, it's essentially going to fire all of those methods to grab the cells and stuff like that, and that's UI work. So we want to make sure that we're doing that in the main thread. And just in case you're not sure about why, it's really the main thread that should be updating and handling the UI. When you start trying to do that from the background, then a background process or thread, then you might start getting performance impact or hits. Okay, so just from doing that, we should be able to see something because I do have a single person object inside core data right now. So if I run the project, you're going to see that it indeed goes to fetch data, and we have one entry, and it's just placeholder right now. Yeah, just ignore that for a second. The reason why it says placeholder is because for this self or row at method, I just set the text of the label for that row to placeholder. But we're going to, I guess we could change that right now. So we're going to get the person from the array, let person equals self.items, and we're going to pass in index path.row, and that's going to give us the person. And then in here, we're going to say person dot name. This is an optional, so I'm just going to force unwrap it, and we'll grab the name. So let's run it again. And instead of placeholder text, we actually see the name of the person object. All right, so now that's fetching data from core data. It's as easy as that, except that right now you can only fetch all of it. You don't know how to sort of sort and filter, but we're going to cover that in the future. All right, now for adding data. How do we add data? Right now, when we click this button, I'm just popping up a pop-up to ask for the name of the person, and we're going to create that new person object and add it to core data. All right, so that's this button handler right here, add tapped. So all I'm doing here is creating a new pop-up. You can see here, I'm adding a text field, and then I am writing a submit button that says add, right? And when that add button gets tapped on, so if we go back here, you know, they'll fill in a name like Joe. When this add button gets tapped on, this is the code that's going to get run. All right, so how do we access the text in this field? Well, the alert, since we added a text field to the alert through this add text field method, we can access the array of text fields like this, alert.textfields. And we can access the first one because there only is one. We only did this once, right? So that's our text field right here. And here we're going to create a new person object, and then we're going to assign the name and the age and the gender and stuff like that. All right, so let new person equals, and we're going to try to create a new person object like usual by using these rounded brackets. But you'll see here that because this is a subclass of NSManagedObject, right? That's what allows it to be saved into core data, like we had talked about. Because that's the case, you'll see that I have this option right here, right, to create this person object in a specific context, right, in a 𝗧𝗶𝗺𝗲𝗄 NSManagedObject context. Well, we're going to pass in the context that self.context. We're going to pass in this context up here, right? That's how we're interacting with our core data persistent container. Right, so where was that code? Right here. So just like that, we've created a new person object in that context, and now we're going to set some properties for it. So new person dot name is equal to text field dot text, and this is that text field right there in the pop-up. And for the age, I'm just going to set it to some arbitrary number. Same thing with gender, but I assume that you would ask for all of this data, you know, when you're adding a new person. Okay, so just creating a person object in the context is not enough to save the data. You actually have to save it. If you don't save it, then the next time you run it, you won't actually find this person anymore. It doesn't get saved into core data. So the way you save the data is through the managed object context. So self.context.save, and that's simply it. Notice that this method also throws, right? So you can wrap it in a do catch block and, you know, try to catch an error if there's a problem saving it. So you have to put a try keyword in front of the throw method. You can do this and try to catch the error if there's a save data error, or you can simply not care if there are errors or not and do that. If this were an actual app, I would definitely try to catch all the errors and respond to it and let the user know that there was an error in saving the data and all of that. All right, so saving the data, and then we have to refresh the table view because all we've done now is create a new person object and we've saved it to core data. But that doesn't change this array which the table view is reading off of, right? So I am going to call the 𝗓𝗄𝗎𝗄 method right here, self.fetchPeople. And just in case you don't remember about this 𝗓𝗄𝗎𝗄 method, if I scroll up here, all it does is it hits the managed object context, passing in a person fetch request to grab all of the people objects back, assigns it to this property which the table view is reading off of, and then calls tableview.reload to reload the data. And good thing that this puts it on the main thread because we're calling it from a background thread right here. And this is a button handler from the submit button. Okay, the last thing to do is add the button to the alert and then to present the alert. So let's run this code, and we should be able to add new objects to our database. So let's say Joe. When I hit add, what's going to happen? It's going to create a new person object in our managed object context. It's going to save the context, thereby saving the object into core data, and then it's going to call fetch to fetch that data back from core data, or fetch Joe back from core data. So add, boom, we got Joe. Nice. All right, so now let's do delete. So I did this. It's just a swipe action on the table view row. It's actually very easy to do. Down, where was it? Right here, trailing swipe action. So that's what we're configuring. So we're going to create a new swipe action. All it is a UI contextual action, and the style is destructive since it's going to be a delete function. The title is delete, and then here is the handler, the code for what happens when you trigger that swipe action. So first, let's get a reference to the person object that we want to remove. So let person to remove equal self.items. All right, and as a parameter, it tells you which row was swiped on here. So index path.row. Okay, that's going to give us the person to remove. This is optional, so let's unwrap that. Okay, so now actually to remove the person. And again, we do these core data functions through the managed object context. So self.context actually delete object, and you just pass in the object. So here we're going to pass in person to remove. And again, you have to save or else it's not going to take effect. So view.context.save. Again, it throws, so you're going to wrap this in a do catch and catch that error if there was an error in deleting, in the deletion. Save the data and then refetch the data here. Self.fetch people. All right, so let's run this and test that out. So let's delete Joe. Delete. So he's gone. And if I rerun my app, you'll see that we only have Ted. Okay, so we can add another person, Sammy, to replace Joe. Okay, so now the last thing is did select row. When we, let's say, select Sammy, all I'm doing here is throwing up a pop-up, same idea with the text field. Let's take a look at the code. We have here did select row. Here I'm just getting the person that was selected through this parameter that indicates which row was tapped on. And then I'm creating an alert. I'm adding a text field, and I am getting a reference to that text field from here, and I'm preloading the person's name, all right, the selected person, preloading his or her name into the text field so that when it brings up the text field, we have the existing name in there already. And then I configured a save button. So you can see here the handler, when that gets tapped, that is where we are going to edit the name. So the selected person, we got a reference to it up there already. Dot name is equal to whatever name is in the text field now, you know, assuming that person did actually change the name. And then again, save the data. And then finally refetch the data. So let's run this code right now. Oh, and the last thing I did was add the save button to the alert and then present the alert when upon tapping of a row. Okay, so let's tap on Sammy and let's save Sammy as Joe. So now when I relaunch the app, you can see that it's Ted and Joe. So just to do a quick recap on all four of the operations we talked about, in terms of fetching, you call the fetch method of the managed object context and you pass in a fetch request. Now that could be a fetch request for all of the objects of that type, or it could be one that's sorted and filtered upon, which you'll learn in a future video. In terms of inserting people or adding new data, what you do is you create a new object in the context, right? And then you call save. And then for deleting, you call the delete method of the context, and you pass in the object you want to delete from core data, and then you have to remember to save it. And finally, for updating, you simply change whatever you want to change on that object, and then you save it. All right, so now you learned how to create, retrieve, update, and delete data in core data. Now I have a question for you. Now that you have a basic understanding about how to use core data, is it easier or harder than you thought? Let me know by leaving a quick comment below. And lastly, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. It's going to help the YouTube algorithm give this video more exposure, and I really appreciate that, so thank you. In the next lesson, you'll learn how to sort and filter the results that you get back from core data. All right, I'll see you there.